Rappin' with ReefBum is sponsored by Marine Depot.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin' with the ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhammer. So on today's show, we are going to talk about Dinoflagellates, and with me on the live stream tonight is Jason Mack, who is the admin of Mack's Reef, a dino support group on Facebook. Hey Jason, welcome to the live stream, man.
Hi, good evening.
Thanks for joining us. It's a little, Jason is English, but he's been living in Holland. That's where he's at right now for the last 25 years, and so it's a little late there right now, 11 o'clock at night. So we're gonna I promise to be mindful of that, and we'll probably be on the live stream for about an hour, and then you can get to bed. But so just a little bit about Jason. He's been keeping reef tanks for about 6 years, and has been helping people with the dinos for about 3 years before he decided to start his own help group. And before we get into the discussion with Jason, I just want to take care of a little business here. And thank the show's sponsor, Marine Depot. This is the last show that they're going to be sponsoring. For those of you that don't know, Marine Depot was purchased by Bulk Reef Supply. So Marine Depot is having an awesome liquidation sale. If you haven't taken advantage of it yet, do so, because stuff is going fast. But I just want to thank Marine Depot again for being a supporter of the show. And I'll keep my fingers crossed for future episodes that we could find another sponsor. But I also want to thank you folks out there who have been tuning in and watching. I really appreciate that, and as always, feel free to ask a lot of questions in the chat, and especially during this episode, if you're battling dinos, Jason is the man. He's a wealth of information, and he helps. I don't know, Jason, how many people a day do you help in your Facebook group, would you say, on average?
On average, I don't know, maybe 10 a day, maybe more.
Wow. And is it like an ongoing thing where people, are hitting you up questions, the same people day after day, or is it you just kind of like go case by case?
If they make a post, then we answer the post. But yeah, I also get private messages in Messenger where I'm talking one-on-one with people.
Gotcha. So right off the bat, I want to say that you and I pronounce dinos differently. I pronounce them dinos, and you pronounce them dinos. It took me a long time. I was pronouncing them dinos for a very, very long time, and it took a lot of effort on my part to you know, to say dinos, because that's what a lot of folks here in the U.S. were pronouncing it as. But I guess it just depends on where you live, right?
Yeah, I guess it's just tomatoes and tomatoes.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so for the folks out there that are watching, I hope you don't get too annoyed that we're pronouncing this differently. But really, two main topics here tonight, talking about dinos, is prevention and eradication. So, Jason, you've obviously had some experience with dinos. Did it happen with your first reef tank, and did you win that battle?
It didn't happen with my first. It happened with my third tank. I started with a small 363 litre, and then I went to a 100 litre, and then I upgraded again to a 350 litre. And then the tank was doing fine for about a year and a half, and then I had a series of problems that led me to the point of having dinos. And then I battled dinos for, I think, 6 or 7 months. And I had 2 sorts in the tank at the same time.
So how did you go about fighting dinos? Were you you know, just perusing the forums? Were you trying to, you know, get advice from local reef keepers? How did you kind of research up on the topic?
Well, I suppose I started out on Reef to Reef. I've been a member on there for, I think, five years or something now. And they have a big thread on there, battling with the Dinoflagellates. And I got help from there first with the ID on which type I had. And then I went through the scenarios of, yeah, okay, you need a UV. And then I got rid of the Ostreopsis using the UV and hydrogen peroxide the first time. And then a few months later, I got them again, and they came back, and I had Ostreopsis and Amphidiniums together. So it was, yeah, my head was in pieces, and I think I almost quit twice because of it.
I tell you, there are definitely instances during my reef keeping career where I was like, the hell with this stuff, I'm hanging it up. And I actually did hang it up a couple of times, just took a break for a year or two in the hobby. You know, it can get frustrating, and you know, battling dinos is not easy. I mean, I've been in the hobby a very, very long time, and you know, that's been one of the greatest challenges for me, is to try to get rid of dinos.
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, dinos are in every system. You know, they're part of the ecosystem. Only with the right conditions, they're going to flourish.
Right. I mean, I've heard that. Can you explain that some more? So, essentially, every tank has dinoflagellates. They're even in corals, right?
Yeah, they're actually zooanthelia, are a type of dinoflagellates. So what happens when corals get stressed? Probably more than likely it's from lights. Then if your trace elements aren't in line properly, then your corals can't deal with the antioxidants that build up inside them, and essentially what they do is to protect themselves, they'll expel the zooanthelia, and then the zooanthelia then morph or change into dinos to survive. That's the current thinking, anyway.
So if somebody has a dino outbreak in their tank, and they're trading frags or something like that, or swapping corals, is that something that person should not be doing in terms of potentially transferring dinos from their tank to the other person's tank? Or does it not matter because everybody's tank has dinos, and you're just essentially, they'll show themselves when the conditions are right?
Well, what I'd say is 80% of dinos are expelled to zooanthelia, and the other 20% would be imported, so that come in on fish or corals or rock or algae even.
Right. So you've already kind of alluded to this, Jason, but there are many different types of dinos, and there's different ways, you know, and thus there's different ways to get rid of them. Some dinos are free floating and go into the water column at night, while others kind of stay in the rockwork and the sand. The free floating type are easier to beat. Do you want to just kind of give us a quick summation in terms of the different types of, I know there's like so many different varieties of dinos out there, but what are the main ones that we as reef tank hobbyists have to deal with?
Well, actually, I think there's something like 1,500 different types of dinos.
Wow.
And I think marine velvet is also from the dino family as well. But the five that we get in or we see in our tanks the most is Ostreopsis, which is a free-floating ones. They're the most toxic and the most ugly from all the dinos, and they will cover everything from wave makers, glass, corals, rocks, sand, high and low in the tank. Coolia is also the other free-floating one. They're shorter strands and again all over the tank. Then you have Prorocentrum, and these tend to be Prorocentrum are the second most toxic of the dino types that we see, and they tend to be more on the sandbed or on the lower rocks only. Then we have the Amphidiniums, the large cell and small cell, and the large cell are like a dusting on your sandbed, and they only really stay on the sandbed. And then the small cell, they will go everywhere in the tank.
So, how did you learn about all this stuff? I mean, you just really became so engrossed in terms of your own issues and problems. You did a ton of research, and you just learned from that research, and you had some success getting rid of them. And is that kind of a good summation of how you became a somebody that runs a dino support group on Facebook?
Well, yeah. I just did a load of research on it, and I was, like I say, I was on Reef to Reef, and I was getting help from a couple of guys on there who I would say were my mentors over it. They helped me with the IDs and everything, and then I was also helping people on Reef to Reef with it, and I became more familiar with it, and I was doing more, and yeah, I from then on, I think more people. I came into more contact with people. Also on Facebook and in my own area where I was just helping people, and also my local, my LFS, my local fish shop, where I help out sometimes, and I'd go in there and I'd ID for clients there, and yeah, it's I know how devastating it was for me, and to think that I can maybe help somebody else get through it with the right information, then that's what I want to try. That's what I try and do.
Yep.
I just try and help as many people as we can,
Yep.
because there's so many people who quit the hobby or even try and restart their tanks because of this, and they lose. You know, you can lose so much money in fish, in corals, in time, in experiments, in buying this or buying that treatment, and so what we wanted to do was put all the information on one site, one group where it'd be available for everybody.
So we have somebody that needs a little help or has a question. TP Plumber 217. I have Coolia in the sand, only nothing out of control now after 1 year of fight, but I only have one side of the tank lit up for some time now. How do I transition from this? Nutrients are very high, UV, etc. And he says the other side of the tank is unlit and clean, but I think it will explode when I reintroduce the light.
Yeah. So for Coolia, UV is best, and the ratio is 1 watt per 3 gallons. And we recommend that you set it up, temporarily set it up so that it's pulling and returning water from your display tank, which means you want a UV with a hose and the pump going into your tank near the bottom of the sand, or as near to the bottom of the sand as possible, and then returning back into your tank. And the flow is really, really important. And we recommend between 1 to 3 times your tank's volume, and preferably the lower end of that every time.
So let's talk about in terms of the location of the UV. You know, you and I were talking before the show, or maybe it was last week when we're chatting via Skype, that I told you that I had a dino outbreak in my 225-gallon tank, and that I essentially eradicated them with UV, but I did put the UV in the sump, and I did have some dinos, not as many in the sump, you know, because there wasn't not a lot of light in that sump, but it did work for me. Are you just saying that it potentially could be more effective if you do put it in the display tank? And what's the difference really? Because are you just trying to optimize the contact time in the area where you have the dinos?
From all the tanks that we've seen over the years, and all the posts that people have posted where people have said, yeah, I have the UV in the sump and it doesn't work. And, you know, and we see the best results when the UV is temporarily set up in the display tank. That's not to say it won't work in the sump. Out of my own, from what we believe, it's like Dinos don't really, for some reason, end up in the sump area. Or they're not going through the system as much.
Yeah, you know, I had I've got some frag tanks in my sump room, and what, you know, so they light up the sump for my my display tank, and so that's why there was, you know, there is light presence in that sump. So that's probably, I'm assuming that's why I had the dinos in there. But yeah, if the UV did not work, then I was prepared to move it to the display tank. But I was happy that it did, because it's not easy in terms of kind of setting that up as a temporary, you know, thing on a display tank. I guess you just have to make sure you have a good, sturdy, temporary mount set up.
I think also a lot of it has to do with the health of each individual tank. And some people will have a light outbreak of Dinos, and only by raising nutrients and dosing things like phytoplankton and copepods, it will also ease the Dinos, or at least they see a big improvement with it.
Right, you know, and mine were the Ostreopsis, right?
Yeah.
And so it was bad, you know. They basically, it's a bare bottom tank. They were covering the rocks. There was long strands of them on the bottom of the glass on the tank. But essentially what I did was I siphoned out as many as I could. I did 2-day blackout, and then I also increased nitrates and phosphates, because those had pretty much nearly bottomed out. And then I ran the UV, and that whole combination really worked. But I know from our prior conversation, you said to me that blackouts are not necessary.
I don't recommend them.
You don't recommend them. Why is that?
Well, you'll know yourself. You lost corals, and you only did a 2-day blackout.
I did lose a couple of frags.
And you know, corals aren't happy. And essentially, when your tank is in the dark like that, biologically, it starts to shut down.
Right. But, you know, I mean, what I've read and heard is that, you know, in the wild, you've got periods where there's storm systems that are coming through, and so there are natural points on the reef that, you know, in certain instances where they might not be getting sunlight for 2 or 3 days because of storms. You know.
I imagine there's some sort of light getting through. It's not like it's in total blackness for 3 days.
Right. Blue Reef is saying that I had good live rock that had beneficial bacteria that helped check my Dinos. Yeah, Dinos. Now you got me calling it Dinos. Maybe I should just say Dinos for this live stream, and then I'll go back to the way I was called. You know, that way we're not hopping back and forth on pronunciation. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, if we talk about aluminium, then I'll say aluminum.
Oh, right. Yeah. Tomato.
Exactly.
The other thing that I started to also do was dose some bacteria. I did not dose Microbacter 7, which I know a lot of people say, you know, had said to me that I should do. I started dosing the Microbacter Clean, and I understand that to be a less aggressive bacteria, but even though I do have the live rock that I started the tank with, I'm experimenting a little bit and dosing the bacteria. Is that something that, depending on the type of dinos that you have, that you should do, dosing bacteria?
Yeah, dosing bacteria is always good as you're doing maintenance doses, but also don't forget something like Microbacter 7 is nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria. And this is also going to lower your nutrients.
Right.
And
so if that's going on, do you recommend having to feed the tank more heavily, or dose nitrates and phosphates?
I think the most easiest and the most controllable way of raising them is with dosing. Because, I mean, you can turn your skimmer off, you can run your skimmer for 12 hours or turn it off 24 hours, you can feed more, and it all takes time, you know. And when you're when you're at this stage, and normally at this stage, and you're dealing with dinos in a tank, you're having trouble keeping them nutrients in that water. So dosing them every day and checking them every day and dosing them accordingly is going to help you build up quicker a buffer zone for it.
Right. What about the use of macro like Chaeto? What about the use of macro like Chaetomorpha? Should you stop doing that, using the Chaetomorpha while you're trying to battle the dinos?
Oh, the Chaeto.
Yeah. There's another one. Chaeto, Chaeto.
Chaeto. Wasn't that Bruce Lee? Chaeto.
Right, there you go. That was his buddy.
Now, again, it all depends on where your nutrients are. I mean, you don't want to have a big refugium full of Chaeto if his nutrients are at 0, because he's working too good. Right. Your system's too clean.
Well, what about if the dinos are absorbing all the nutrients? I mean, isn't that a possibility that they're just sucking everything up? Well, are you fueling them by dosing nitrates and phosphates to try to get nitrates and phosphates up? No.
They're not living off nitrates and phosphates. That's why they can do so well in a system that has no nitrates and phosphates.
Right.
That's the time they thrive.
Right. Flipper's Reef says hello to you there, Jason, and is also saying, I've switched to dosing bacteria as a maintenance program, MB7 and MB Clean at each water change. That's interesting. I'm going to actually have Jack Kent on from the CEO of Brightwells on a live stream. I think it's going to be in August, and I'm going to I'm very interested to talk to him because there's a lot of questions that I have in terms of MB7 and Microbacter Clean. I've heard though that you're not supposed to use both of those products together at the same time, but I'm not positive about that. But that's a question that could certainly ask him.
Well, I'm in Holland, so it's hard for me to get Brightwell products. Otherwise, I have to order them specially from America.
Right. So, what are you using in terms of bacteria dosing?
I use Micro Lift Special Blend.
Who makes that?
Micro Lift.
Oh, Micro Lift. Okay. Never heard of those guys. So,
European thing, I think.
So, Jason, let's go back to UV sterilizers and talk about flow rates. You said that you make a certain recommendation in terms of flow rates for a UV sterilizer, and
yeah.
The UV sterilizer that I'm using for my 225 gallon tank is an Aqua UV 57 watt sterilizer, and I did not go below the recommended flow rate, that the manufacturer recommended for that UV sterilizer. In some cases, are you recommending that folks go below what the manufacturer recommends as the minimal flow rate for a UV sterilizer to increase that contact time?
Yeah.
Is there any risk in terms of potentially damaging the unit and burning out the bulb if you go too low of a flow?
Well,
in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. I think so long as your UV is full, so long as you've got it turned up so that he's full all the time, then it shouldn't be a problem. But I mean, if you've got it turned on its side and he's only half filling up because there's not enough flow, then obviously you're going to run risks. And another thing as well, like running it slow, some people say it does tend to increase the temperature of the tank a little bit.
Right. And what should we be mindful in terms of the temperature of a tank with dinos? I've heard that in some instances that could be a good thing in terms of having a temperature, elevating the temperature to 83 degrees.
Yeah, that's never been proven.
It's never been proven,
in my opinion. I mean, I remember the original post that came out with that a few years ago, and from what I believe, the guy didn't even have. It turned out the guy didn't even have Dinos, and he'd never had a positive ID on it. And I've tried to replicate it with people on the group. I've asked people. I've said to them, the only thing I want you to do is raise the temperature on your tank and see if it has an effect. And we see it in the post when people come on and they join and they say, okay, I've tried Dino X, I've tried hydrogen peroxide. I've tried Dr. Tim's waste away and everything, and nothing's had an effect. We've tried temperature raising. So for some people, yeah, they say it works, and for some people, a lot of people, they say it doesn't. But there's no proof for it.
So a couple more comments, questions from the chat. TP Plumber 217 says, when coming out of dinos, when and how should we start resuming water changes? It's been a year now. Laugh out loud.
No, yeah. Now, I wouldn't say you have to stop water changes. People say you don't do water changes because normally they get a dino outbreak, or it seems to get worse after they've done a water change. But what we say to people is try and use a salt mix with a low iron content, because we believe that iron in the salt, in high salt mixes, is what's feeding the dinos.
So you're all right. So this is interesting because I know there's some folks out there that believe that if you dose iron, then that could be effective in terms of battling dinos. But you're not totally on board with that, right?
No.
And
well,
let's
no, I mean,
let's
talked about this.
Yeah,
Keith.
let's back up a little bit. I think one thing that that you and I have talked about, and I know from your live stream that you had done, that a key component of all this is to do an ICP test first to kind of see where you're at, right?
Yeah. Because most of the times, well, nearly all the time, we see tanks, when we ask people to do an ICP test, we see that the trace elements are off, whether one or a couple are high or there's a few missing. And this tends to be the underlying problems with the dinos in the tanks. With, I think, with zero nutrients being the trigger.
So I can't recall ever getting an ICP test back with any level of iron in it. Is that a common thing that folks see? Is that they pretty much come back with an ICP test that has 0 iron, or is that not common and perhaps my tanks are atypical?
Iron's not really one we see. When you have iron, then I think you're looking for rust in a tank. You know, this is the only time we really see high levels of iron, is when something's rusted in a tank, and then you'll also see it arise in the zinc and the nickel as well. So it's a type of iron that you're adding to the tank that's going to be the problem.
So then when you and I were talking before, you basically said you need to do an ICP test, right, to see what your levels of iron are. What are people looking for? If they're seeing 0, does that mean dosing iron is okay to try to battle dinos?
My advice would be never dose trace elements if you're not doing it on the recommendations of an ICP test.
Right.
So everything, trace elements is trace elements, and they're called trace elements because they're in trace amounts. The amounts that are there are so small that, yeah, really on your own you'd think there was nothing, they wouldn't have any influx on it. But it's the balance and it's the ratio that they have in combination with the other trace elements, and this is what we need to correct. So you can have it a little bit higher if it's in balance with everything else, or a little bit lower if everything else is in balance.
But in theory, if you just dose iron without any knowledge in terms of where you're at in terms of levels, you could potentially fuel the dinos, right?
You'd have to have had a dino outbreak to start that. And if you've already got a dino outbreak, then there's other issues in your tank that have led to that.
Right. And let's also talk about something that's very, very, very important. And you talked about the different types of dinos in terms of the free floating versus the not free floating, and the large cell versus the small cell. But step number 1 when somebody's got an issue is to get a microscope, or at least send out a water sample to somebody that does have a microscope, and get an idea on these things before you start willy-nilly just trying different things, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there's certain steps that you can take before you get an ID, or before you get an ID them. Firstly, you can reduce your lighting, reduce the peak time to maybe 5 or 6 hours. You run more blues, less whites. Run activated carbon for the toxins to help take the toxins out of the water. You can dose live phytoplankton and copepods to help support the microbiology of your tank. Yeah.
So,
and you can be cleaning it out before
right.
sucking as much out as possible.
Yeah. So, Larry Zardo had asked this question about the kind of dino that it's battling, and comment is after controlling dino, my sand has completely black. Do you have any idea in terms of the kind of dino? And I think the answer to that is you got to get a water sample, and you got to put that dinos under a microscope and exactly see what you're dealing with, right?
Yeah, I mean sometimes. I mean, Ostreopsis is quite easy to recognize. We don't really need a microscope to ID that one. You see the long slit, the long strings and the bubbles, and you see it all over in the tank. It's 90% sure that it's going to be Ostreopsis. But when they're on the sandbed, and then, like a Protocentrum have short strands and they tend to be more mat-like on the sand. So when you pull at it, if you try to pull it off, it'd come up in a mat. Well, to get a positive ID is to make sure that it's only you know what you're dealing with. It could be more. You could have 2 or even 3, and we know people who've had all the dinos in the tank at the same time.
Right. So what do you do if you're dealing with multiple varieties of dinos? You've got different methods. So you've got some free floating. You've got the variety that are sticking to the rocks and to the sand. Or are you basically throwing everything but the kitchen sink at them in terms of things that you do to get rid of dinos if you've got multiple?
Well, the thing with that is like Ostreopsis and Coolia are probably the easiest to deal with, and with the UV set up properly with the right kind of flow, normally we see them gone in anything from 3 days to 7 days. And then you need to run. We advise you run the UV for another couple of weeks after that, still, because some dinos can turn into cysts and they can lay dormant and this sort of thing. So that's the quickest to deal with. And seeing how Ostreopsis are the most toxic, then these are the ones that we're going to tackle first, because this is going to take the shortest amount of time. And when you were dealing with Protocentrum of amphidiniums, then we're talking, it can be from weeks to even months of dosing silicates. So we'll do the quickest ones first, and the most dangerous ones, or the most toxic ones, and then we'll deal with the other ones after.
So you just can't...
And also a UV will also inhibit diatoms growth, because they're also free floating. They also go into the water column at night. So if you're going to be dosing silicates and you're running a UV, then you're working against yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to be running my UV moving forward 24/7. I just I like what they can do, and it's sort of like a preventative measure in terms of for the dinos, but I also like the bless you, the water clarity that it provides, and I just think there's a lot of positives that running UV on a reef tank versus any negatives, and I don't really believe that you're too at risk in terms of zapping beneficial bacteria, because all those beneficial bacteria should be in your rock and sand, right?
Yeah, they're not free floating.
Right.
The good bacteria, or most 90% of the good bacteria, sits in your rocks and your substrate, and not in the water.
So I've got a theory, and I've been keeping reef tanks for 25 plus years, and I don't know, I think it was maybe 6 years ago was the first time I ever had dinos in one of my tank, and so this seems to be a relatively new phenomenon in the past 10 years or so, I guess. But my theory is that the equipment these days is so efficient versus years ago, and you've got these high-powered skimmers and roller mats in terms of really, really good filtration. So it makes it so easy these days to strip nutrients from the water and from the tank, and opening the door for dinos, since that is a something that is a precursor for seeing dinos for many folks. Do you buy into that theory?
Yeah, and I think also LED lights have a big part to play in this.
Explain that.
Well, let's say 10, 15 years ago, when everybody was running the ultra-low nutrient systems, and they were using T5s and metal halidates, and there was hardly any Dinos out there, or it was very rare to come across a tank with Dinos. And then since we've had the explosion of technology with the LED lights, then and now we see that Dinos are in zero nutrient environments, are thriving. It's a simple connection to make. I think the lights are a lot, too strong for how we use them, I think.
I mean, the couple of times that I've gotten Dinos, I've had them under the middle headlight lights. So I guess my question to you is that is it more about what people are doing with the LEDs in terms of cranking up that intensity, that because they can really be I don't want to use the word overdriven, but you can really generate a lot of power, right, with LED fixtures.
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way, Keith. I'm English, so I'm milk bottle white. When I take my shirt off, you need to put your sunglasses on. Just now, if I go out in the sun when it's at its most strongest, if it was like 30 degrees and I went out and stood all day in the sun, I'd get burned badly, really badly.
Right.
But if I went out for an hour each day in the sun and slowly built it up, then there's a big difference. And I think this is, one of the problems is that we're pulling corals from other tanks. We put them in straight away in our tank. How many people are doing light acclimation with tanks? Everyone says, okay, we put them on the bottom first, the corals, and then we'll move them up and things like this. But I think if you build up slowly, then it's okay. But if it's too strong, too soon, too quickly, then this is where the problems are going to be.
I think what I'm hearing is that it's some sort of situation where the coral in the tank is kind of getting stressed out, and for me, the couple of times that I've gotten Dinos, it's been an instance where, all right, the tank is getting low in nutrients. I better start upping the nutrients, so I start upping the feeding in terms of fish food and coral food, using amino acids or what have you, and I go heavy on the stuff. And in both those cases, I had a dino outbreak, and I think it was just because I did it too fast, and it was stressful to the system.
Well, amino acids will also feed Dinos, we believe.
Right, so there's something in terms of that jump-starting a dino outbreak.
Yeah.
Right, so if you have dinos, then pretty much you should stop dosing amino acids, stop dosing coral food, and just try to and what you said before.
Reduce carbon dosing as well.
Reduce carbon dosing.
This is also going to feed them.
And use just dose nitrates and phosphates directly.
Yeah.
What about
if it's needed?
Right. What about live rock versus dry rock? I think. I'm of the belief that dinos are more prone to show themselves in a tank started by dry rock because there's less biodiversity in the dry rock. I understand that if you're dosing bacteria with a dry rock only tank, that can overcome that problem. But do you think one of the reasons why we've seen a lot more in terms of dinos, there's a dry rock only tank?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a valid point, that since there's a lot more dry rock only tanks these days, that's a part of the issue?
I don't think so. No. I think how people start their tanks, on how people are going through the cycle, has something to do with it.
Right. I got dinos.
Already...
I got dinos in a live rock tank. A tank I started with live rock.
Yeah, exactly. If the conditions are right for them, they're going to thrive.
Yeah, and I do think it was because of the whole thing I was talking about in terms of having an equipment that's so efficient. I've got a very strong skimmer, and I think it was just kind of an imbalance in the system in terms of feeding too much from trying to overcome nutrients that had bottomed out. So Dan Sullivan, get Cruz from Elegance Corals in here. I don't know what that means. So One thing that I had mentioned to you is that at one point I had a frag tank that had dinos that showed up into it, and it was plumbed into my established system. Now, it was odd because I had dinos show up into the frag tank that was plumbed into the display tank, but dinos only showed up in the frag tank and not in the display tank. But I had the display tank had sand, and frag tank was bare bottom. The only thing in that frag tank is egg crate, and it was new egg crate. Is that another thing that potentially can be a something that jumpstarts dinos, is to have something that is doesn't have any bacteria on it, and will provide a jumping off point for dinos? Or
well, some plastics will actually leach tin.
Will that show up on an ICP test?
Yeah.
Okay.
That should.
Okay.
So then we come back to that issue of, like, you get back to the trace elements, and are the trace elements good and in balance? For me, anyway, I don't think, I mean, you said it yourself, you have it in one tank, it's plumbed into the same system, it's in one tank, and it's not in another tank.
Yeah, it's kind of...
It's the same for the sump, with the UV being in the display or in the sump area. It's like, we don't see a vast amount of dinos in the sump area, but they're in the display. So are they traveling totally through that system?
So, all right, we're getting more clarity in terms of the elegance corals method. Here, Lurie Zardo says the elegance corals method recommended dose vodka with bacteria. Do you think is wrong, Jason?
Now, I know Cruz personally, and I'm also on the other Dino group as well. I'm also a moderator on that group. And I personally, I don't agree with their system. And I don't... Creating a bacteria bloom in a tank is dangerous if it's not done properly. And we know it because how many tanks have crashed because of bacteria blooms. So for me, it's like playing with fire. And I've been on that group also for more than a year now, and even their regime doesn't work every time for every type of dinos. I've seen people lose corals, lose fish because of doing it, doing bubble scrubbing, doing the regime 4, 5, 6 times and still having the dinos.
It's Oop, that was my dog. You all right, buddy? I just completely lost my train of thought. So, you've mentioned dosing silicates. What is the best? I mean, in terms of the types of dinos that you're fighting, what would be the best instance to start dosing silicates? At what point would you be doing that?
Once you've had an ID that it's either Prorocentrum or large cell or small cell amphis.
That's when you would dose the silicates. And how do you know in terms of how much silicates to dose? You got to do ICP tests to make sure that you're getting to that certain level that you need to be at.
Well, the thing is like, really you can't crash a tank with dosing silicates. You can overdose a tank, but there's no ill effects to overdosing silicates. One thing that might happen is that your KH might rise slightly from it. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to induce a diatom bloom that's going to outcompete the dinos.
Let's talk about that, because I've heard that a lot in terms of dosing certain things to try to outcompete the dinos. So, like, I've heard about dosing pods, I've heard about dosing phyto. You're talking about dosing silicates. So you got to get your tank really ugly looking, right, to try to create other algae to outcompete the dinos.
Basically, it's like kickstarting your system again. And basically, what will happen after dosing the silicates is, like, normally we cycle in the tank, you get the diatoms, and then you get green hair algae. and that's essentially what happens again. So it's like a kickstart.
Yeah, and then it's just like, all right, then you've beaten the dinos, and now you got another problem, and now you're fighting another problem. Maybe you've got some cyano that's hanging around, and you use ChemiClean on it. And I've heard people like, all right, well, I've ChemiCleaned to get rid of the cyano, and now I've got dinos back again. It just seems like it could be a vicious circle in terms of trying to like fight one thing after another.
I hear people get dinos after using Vibrant. I know I did.
Yeah, you know what? I use Vibrant.
Again, Keith, again, it comes down to the health, the individual health of each tank. And it's hard for me to sit on the other side of a computer or the other side of a telephone and see inside somebody's tank. And we're only getting the information that they're giving us.
Right. I really hesitate in terms of using, I'll call them chemicals. I don't know if Vibrant is considered a chemical. I know there's Dino X that is out there that people utilize. What are your beliefs in terms of using those types of products to fight dinos?
Well, I did a podcast, or I did a live interview with the owner from Fauna Marin last week, Claude Schumacher, and we talked about Dino X, and he explained the reason why Dino X came about. And that was because 10, 15 years ago in North Germany, they found a new strain of dinos that had come out that was just so aggressive that it would turn the tank water brown. You could smell it when you walked into the room, and it just basically killed everything within a few days. So Dino X was developed to tackle this kind of problem. And it's meant to be used as a last resort in a tank. And Claude will say to you himself, before you use Dino X, do an ICP test and make sure all your trace elements are online.
Right.
So that your tank is able, your corals are able to work all the antitoxins and everything out of them. And they need to trick I think he called it the dynamic metals. So your zinc, your nickel, and that sort of thing. Vanadium, molybdenum.
Yeah, the first time that I fought dinos, I did actually end up breaking down the tank because I was throwing everything at them but the kitchen sink. But I hit them up with a lot of stuff, including Vibrant. Then I got a serious case of cyano after the dinos went away. And then I think I might have zapped the cyano with ChemiClean. And then eventually the dinos came back, and it was just like, it was one thing after another I was trying. I did some blackouts. I did peroxide. This was, I really didn't do enough research at the time in terms of I didn't ID them under a microscope, so I didn't know what I was battling. I was just kind of, trying a lot of different things that I had, read about, and that was the wrong approach. But I don't question the decision to break the tank down because the corals took a beating. And I think it would have taken a very, very long time for those corals, which pretty much were frags, to recover. So I made the choice to break the tank down for a couple of weeks and reboot it. I used a live rock to reboot the tank, and it's been very, very successful. And it was I'm glad I did it that way. But I think what's important for people to understand is to get an ID on them first, get a plan of attack based on the variety of dinos that you're fighting, and then go from there. But hey, if you're fortunate to get the free floating type, then it could be a relatively easy battle. But if you don't, then it could be a long struggle. Do you for the types of dinos that can
hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you froze.
Okay. For the type of dinos that are in the rocks and the sand, do you think it helps to remove the sand bed to go bare bottom?
Yeah, it can. I did it in my tank, and I kept dosing the silicates. But what we tend to see then is they get forced onto the rocks, the large cell amphidiniums, and then it's just they get outcompeted by the silicates, and then you start to see a reduction in the dinos, and you see an increase in the diatoms, and then we just keep checking, and then there comes a point where you know, you can't find a dino anymore in the sample. It's all diatoms, and that's the point to stop dosing.
Right. So if you had to give a new reef keeper advice in terms of what's the best thing, what are the things that you should be doing to prevent a dino outbreak? Because usually you're going to see a lot of these outbreaks in a new tank. But you know, if you had to give somebody advice in terms of starting a new tank, what would that advice be to try to avoid this problem altogether? What would be some top preventative tips?
Keep your nutrients in line. So if it's a mixed reef, say between your nitrates between 5 and 10 ppm, and your phosphates between 0.05 and 0.1.
Don't
do everything slowly.
Don't use LEDs.
Yeah, turn your LEDs down a little bit. You know, it's that whole thing. You know, how many people have a par meter at home on their tank? And when you say to people, "Have you ever tested the par on your tank?" No, I just run the program.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah, I don't own a par meter, but I did rent one from BRS, and you know, it can be helpful. It's good information. Folks, I just want to remind you that you know, since Jason is over in Holland right now, he's 6 hours ahead of us, and it's getting late fast over there. So we're gonna wrap the show up in about 9-10 minutes. And if you have any other comments or questions, just throw them in the chat, and we'll try to get those answered. So Jason, what else?
Yeah, I see one from Dan Sullivan. He said, "I've had nothing but success with Elegance method, dosing through skimmer intake with constant microbubbling. I've had them 3 times already," he said. So it just goes to prove a point, you know, that they tend to come back on the Elegance method. And the other Dino group is also a good group. And I'm also, like I said, I'm also a moderator on there, and I help people on there as well.
So what's the name? I don't know if I mentioned the name of your group. It's Max Reef is your Dino support group. What's the that's on Facebook. What's the other support group? That's on Facebook as well.
Yeah, that's the Dino support group. It's for the Elegance Corals. It's from a guy called Cruz Ariz. He's a really nice guy. A really nice guy.
Gotcha. So, Jason, what else that we haven't talked about that you think is important in terms of you know, dinos, in terms of the preventive measures you could take, as well as, you know, tips for battling them?
Dosing phytoplankton and copepods help support your tank's microbiology. Phytoplankton is the start of the food chain. So everything above it needs that. Well, we need it to live as well. But you know what I mean? From the smallest microbe of that, the next one in line after the phytoplankton, everything's feeding off it after that. So it's a great source to feed tank.
What brand do you use in terms of that, or do you make your own? Grow your own?
No, I don't make my own. I use Colombo, but that's just the brand name over here in Europe. It's the easiest one for me to get, and I like it. I'm happy with it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. I think, and you're also dosing what constantly? Pods.
Yeah, copepods.
You're doing copepods. How often are you doing that?
Well, I dose it 2 to 3 times on my tank, but on my last tank I had a couple of mandarins, and so I was doing it for them as well, you know. But I make a point of just doing it. But I will say, it's biodiversity. The more biodiversity you have in your tank, the better it's going to be. So you can get amphipods, copepods. You can Tisbe pods have been seen to eat dinos. But yeah, getting Tisbe pods over here in Europe is almost impossible.
How often do you dose the copepods?
2 to 3 times a week.
Oh, really?
But I have 100 ml sacks of copepods. So there's probably a couple of thousand in there or whatever.
That's interesting, because I didn't realize that you needed to, you know, constantly dose copepods. I thought once you kind of put a whole bunch of pods in your tank, that they will just multiply on their own.
Yeah, also, but they'll also get eaten. It's also food.
Right. Yeah. What else? Yeah, I guess it for those of you that are battling this issue, I would recommend doing your homework and reaching out to Jason on his support group on Facebook. Like we said at the top of the show, you're helping, what'd you say, like 8 to 10 people a day in terms of.
I think we have now 3,300 members in a year. I was happy when I had 30 members on the group when I started it a year ago. And I can't believe how fast the group has grown and how quickly we've got known. And I think it's fantastic that we can reach so many people and help so many people.
Yeah, listen, man, I commend you for providing that service. It's awesome. I know a lot of people can kind of, this is a very daunting issue, and it probably is an issue that causes a lot of people to drop out of the hobby. It can be very, very frustrating. And some people battle these things for like year plus, right? I mean, it's not unheard of to be doing it for that long.
No, you hear it quite a lot, but then again, people don't, once you get an idea on which type it is, then we know how to deal with it. And then we can start correcting the issues.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for staying up late and being part of the live stream. I'm sure folks got a lot out of it. So any final thoughts there, Jason?
Not
I think
really.
you've said it all in terms of, right, you're
tired.
probably getting a little tired talking about dinos all the time. What are you getting out of this? You're helping people out, so that's good karma for you, right?
Yeah, but I don't make any money. I don't make profit. It's not about the money.
Yeah,
it's
that's
about
awesome.
helping people.
All right.
I don't care about the rest.
All right, everybody. So listen, appreciate you tuning in, and if you have any further comments or questions for Jason, like I said, hit him up on his Facebook page, or you can drop some comments in the on the video here, and I can make sure that Jason will see them. So that'll do it for this show. I want to give my sincere thanks again to Jason for being on the live stream, and I also want to thank Marine Depot one last time for being a sponsor and supporting the show. Again, hit up that liquidation sale. You can get some awesome deals. And again, thanks to all you folks that have been tuning in and watching the show. So my next live stream is going to be next Thursday, July 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Ben Johnson. Ben, who is a maintenance guru and is also co-host of the Reef Beef podcast. He was on the show this past May with Rich and Tulio. That was a lot of fun. So he'll be on again solo to talk about what he does in terms of tank husbandry and maintenance. So it should be another great show. Please tune in. Until then, be safe out there later. And Jason, get to bed.